Okay, today I'm going to talk about clean architecture in JavaScript. It's not about fully blown clean architecture in the meaning of proposed by Uncle Bob Martin, but it will be more about code organization, how to improve your daily your code base, your daily code you work on. So let me start with a disclaimer. Context is important, as you probably know, and Google is fortunately smart enough to guess the context of the end user. So here, Google assumed that someone who typed remove child from parent with fork is not a child murderer, but someone struggling with system processes. But I don't want you to guess my context. So here it is. My name is Mateusz. My surname is hard even for Polish people. Here is the link to this presentation. All slides are already online, so you can enjoy them separately, independently from what I'm presenting. And what else? I'm having some Udemy courses, also on JavaScript, also touching the architecture there. And I work on Polish-American startup called Starburst. Surprise, we are recruiting. So yeah, that's the thing. I'm working with React Codebase, and I used to work with React Codebases for last 3 years, I believe. Previously, I worked mainly with Angular. So this is an important remark for the purpose of future slides. Another remark is that this presentation doesn't cover all the cases. It's rather for cases when reading code is much more frequent than writing code. So it's rather about big web apps, business projects. It's not about a single person, one-man army project you are doing in your spare time. Yeah, it's rather like that. When you have other cases, when you don't need to read code so frequently, you can follow different patterns. But I still believe some of things presented would work for you as well. So another way of saying what is the presentation about is to say what it is not about. So it's not about a new JavaScript framework. But yeah, this slide still touches a sensitive topic. I feel it like each time something new appears, we are throwing away all the things we already know and just start using all these new fancy features. And the reality is that it's not always the best approach, and I will try to prove it in the next slides. So, well, as I said, there are plenty of new things. We are throwing back away old things, but fortunately or unfortunately, how to say that, you name it, since 2016 around, there was that fancy article I enjoy reading each time. Since 2016, I can say React is top one when it comes to front-end frameworks. Maybe not frameworks, React is a library, front-end solutions, right? So I'm also having another talk, which I try to show regularly about front-end overview. And each time I'm presenting, I'm trying to refresh some slides. I'm checking how many NPM downloads a week React has. So for instance, I was presenting personal front-end overview at the beginning of this year, and it was like 7 million downloads a week. And nowadays, it's like 9 million downloads a week, while Angular and Vue are like 2 million downloads a week. So React is like the top one solution, first thing which comes to your mind when creating a new app. But unfortunately, as I said, React is a library, not a framework. So it's not providing you an overall guidelines how to design your code around. Okay, it's let's start with some tips how to organize the code, right? As I said, let's start with something simple, like closer to a single file, a single module, because file in JavaScript is a module, as you know from ES6. So let's start with some patterns which can help you with single module level. So here is the example. code from the official docs from Material UI. Material UI is a solution which allows you to provide some visual components which are according to Google Material Design System. So it's super easy to use this solution, but here, this example comes from the official docs, and I don't like this example. I understand it. They wanted to, let's say, present their solution, put it in the center of the file, but it's not helping you read. Yeah, fortunately, they didn't put export keyword, but still, how would you think what would be the name of this file? In my opinion, name would be the same as the name of the component, so it would be rather my component JSX. So my assumption, my let's say way of thinking when seeing file named my component JSX is that it's all about my component, and entering a file which is designed like here, I'm not seeing my component at the top. I'm seeing some boilerplate code coming from framework and not the most crucial thing from the reader's perspective. So to improve readability in this file, the trick is simple. You can easily change the order of things. This is not any rocket science or something, but I've seen lots of code bases not following this very simple rule. And as I said, I have some Angular background, especially also Angular, including AngularJS. And as you probably know from the React world, you probably know Dan Abramov. But from the AngularJS, when I was learning it, the most, let's say, famous guy there was John Papa. And he came out with something called Angular Style Guide. And it is a great reading. In fact, it was for AngularJS, how to design your app, how to design your files in the app, and so on and so forth. It was really, some things there are outdated. They are just for Angular, but still going through this shows you many other remarks which are still accurate, even for React applications. So the trick I've shown you previously, so switching the order of elements in the file, was also pointed out within this style guide. It was said in Angular there was something like binding and stuff like that. There was a rule from this style guide to put bindable members at top. And here is even the example from this this style guide. So not only I'm entering a file which is probably named similar to this function, yeah, but also entering this file, I'm seeing just API at the top. Yeah, this is also here. There is also an alphabetical order, so I can familiarize myself with all the patterns in the code base. Like every file is sorted alphabetically, so it's easy to find a function. At first glance, I can see what is the API of this file. I have no clue yet what this go to session, refresh, or search functions do, but I can just figure out, okay, these are the three functions. There are also two additional state variables, let's say this way, and so I can quickly figure out, okay, so it's not a component, not a part of application I'm looking for, because I want, for instance, to call an API, and refresh, search, or go to session does not sound like getting, for instance, elements to read. Another trick, which is really easy also with React, especially with the newer version of Create React App, is to go for TypeScript. And I hope it's just obvious. I don't want to dive into it more maybe, but I want to show you how you can easily, with that first version of Angular, how easy it was to isolate, to encourage you to hide implementation details within the file. So here is the mix of AngularJS, which wasn't rely heavily on TypeScript, but a mix of this AngularJS with additional TypeScript types for it. As you can see, what I'm exporting from this file is something which won't be even presented in the JavaScript world. It's just an interface describing my service. There is just one method which returns an array of Avengers from that Marvel movie, right? And what was nice in Angular was that everything could work like that. So I'm having an implementation function which is this returns that interface. I'm also hiding implementation details of the particular object, of its functions. I'm hiding all these things behind the function. I'm putting this function to Angular, so I'm not exporting anything but this interface. So API is just first 3 lines. I cannot importing this type. I cannot do much with it. I cannot even add any additional implementations. No, I cannot do that. But combining it together with Angular dependency injection, I'm sure I'm having a proper implementation somewhere hidden. So this is a strong encapsulation which really can help you. I was thinking about the examples for the React world of such an encapsulation, and it's not so easy to achieve, but we should observe context API, and maybe within the future changes in this API, it would be possible to hide even more from context, for instance, and export just an interface and hide every other things. I hope so. But this is just a thing, just a hint to make you think of encapsulation, to make you think about organizing the code. So having all that, let's move one level above to the clean architecture, from clean code to clean architecture, more like architecture. So let's talk about organizing modules. And I haven't seen plenty of React code bases, but the one I've seen were rather organized in a similar way. And I really hate this way of organizing code base. So this approach is called folder by type. And as you can see, all the components are under, as you can expect, all the components are hide under components directory, all the services under services, and so on and so forth. You can add CSS or styles to the folders here, and so on and so forth. I don't know. For me, it should be totally different. What are the problems with such an approach? So it's not like our business product owner is providing us requirements on Jira with our way of thinking. It's not he or she is not providing us as an administration, I want a new component. He is providing a ticket like, as a user, I want to handle a project. As a project, I want to maintain status or tasks within the project, and so on and so forth. So Jira tickets are feature-oriented, and our code base should be also feature-oriented to make it easy to locate to make it easier to locate a place where we should apply changes, when we should fix the issue, and so on and so forth. Every single issue, problem, or improvement are feature related. Our business language are expressed in the business language. We rarely have tickets like fix all the services. It's rather like as a user, as the admin of system, I want to get all my projects. So it's about a particular service, which service you have to figure out based on the business name. So organizing code with features is much better. Yeah, it's also would be problem of folder by type approach is that it's harder to find a reason, it's hard to apply changes, and so on and so forth. Also, it tends to grow. So, for instance, that components folder would be really huge, like 7 or more files is huge for me. So, what are the solutions? You can think of the architecture. There is the architecture keyword in the in the presentation title, so you can think, okay, so let's go with micro frontends. So it's not talk about micro frontends. Micro frontends solves a different issue. This is when you have independent teams, many teams with different frameworks, for instance, and you want to have independent deployments for these teams. It's also handy to use micro frontends when you have an old code base, for instance, in AngularJS, and you want to transition to start writing new features with React, and one by one you are replacing the old code base with the new one. So these are the problems you use micro frontends for. This won't help you as much organizing your. It can help, but not as much. Web components. This is another nice thing, but not for here. Not as the solution here. It's used. It's useful when you have, for instance, company-wide design system, so then you can easily share framework independently, some kind of visualization mechanisms in your apps, web apps. And another thing which can come to your mind as a React developer is maybe let's go with Redux, and we will organize everything around our centrally managed state. So no, I'm pretty sure it would lead you to adding additional 2 directories and making everything mentioned previously even worse. Also, Redux doesn't organize the app. It serves different purpose. This is rather a way of building the app, but I'm not going to talk about Redux now, because even the author of Redux, famous Dan Abramov, admitted that it's not a simple thing. So we shouldn't talk about it here, because this is not a topic for this presentation. Okay, but Dan Abramov is some kind of guru in this ecosystem, but did he talk about the architecture at any point in time? Well, yes, there is an official webpage created by him, React file structure.search.sh. But when you enter this page, you see the guidelines like this. This is official screenshot I've taken today. So, well, yeah, it can help you, but not much. In my opinion, even for small app, you should start with folders by feature organization of code. And it's also something mentioned in the Angular style guide from John Papa. And in my opinion, it would be useful for all React developers to work for a moment with Angular, not as a punishment. So it can be a punishment a little, but especially AngularJS, but it's about teaching you some kind of general thinking. So Angular as a framework presents you a general approach, provides some building blocks. Even Angular command line interface creates app according to some patterns around organizing the code. And John Papa was a huge contributor at the beginning of the new version of Angular. He also created Angular style guide at the beginning for that, but it was converted to official Angular docs and so on and so forth. So the story was different. Anyway, Angular has had some good patterns, and here from this style guide, I can share one pattern with you. A pattern which is called lift principle. This is the abbreviation. Each letter means something different. L stands for locate easily. So as the example I've provided previously, we have a user who manages projects, and projects have multiple tasks. So when you have to do something around projects, you should locate everything project related easily. This is all about. And the I letter stands for identify the purpose. So the file purpose. So looking at file name, I should immediately know, okay, this file is probably for API calls. Okay, that file is probably for visualization, right? So this is I letter. Then we have F, which is for flat folder structure. And last but not least is T-dry. So try to stick to dry. But this T-dry is the last point for a reason, because previous points are more important. These first 3 points have a higher priority over T-dry. So from the readability perspective, maintainability, independent modules, it's sometimes better to copy a part of code, but it should be an exception. We should rather focus on this don't repeat yourself rule, dry, but not at a cost of any of the previous 3 rules. And this principle is general, but the implementation, this is like a framework, and the implementation is folders by feature structure. So we should name folders after the feature they represent, and it automatically provides us lift. So here is the example. So I'm reorganizing the previous code. I'm having projects, tasks, and user. Don't bother with the files now. This is the target solution, but let's move toward this target step by step. So one more thing, so having projects folder, I should also put all the CSS, all the images connected with projects here as well. But the specific JavaScript or TypeScript files, that's another thing to reason about. So what kind of files should be there? Let's go with Dan Abramov once again. He used to follow some kind of rule, like dividing components, React components, into presentational and container components. He changed his mind after some time, but the reason of changes was that some people were like fanatic about the solution. I think it's still worth having such a way of thinking. So before starting a new component, you can say to yourself, okay, should it be splitted into a big container component which handles manages the state, and small visual components which are presentational or dump components, or should I put everything in a single component? You should always ask yourself such a question before introducing something new. I think it's still useful. But yeah, I've seen so many examples like splitting table into smaller table and table view components, and it wasn't. I agree with Abramov here. We shouldn't be dogmatic here. Well, also some kind of counter-example for this general rule is that sometimes these presentational components also need to serve to have small state, like just for their visualization, let's say this way. But yeah. Also, the other comment from Dan in the article is that he switched to hooks, because hooks let him do the same which this dividing was doing. So it helps separate stateful logic and other aspects of the component. Well, the problem with hooks is that I've never seen a nice tutorial how to like on the concrete examples on how to share your logic with hooks. By practice, I came up with some personal examples, and I want to share them with you, but I'm afraid many people ends up doing another directory in this folder by type and put every hook there, which is not good, definitely. So what are my personal experiences with hooks? Sometimes they help separate business logic. For instance, I have recently created something called tags labels in my professional project. Let's say a project I'm working on a daily basis. And tag was coming with tag to the example structure I've shown you in the previous slides. It is something which allow you to mark either project or task, so it's some kind of common logic for them. So you can have a hook which encapsulates an API call for taking all the tags assigned to a business entity and to add these tags, remove them, and so on. So sometimes it is useful, but in most cases I've seen hooks rather for technical aspects. So instead of having use history and then going to homepage or use router and going to homepage, you can encapsulate it in your own custom hook, use homepage and go for homepage thanks to that hook. We also, on my project in my company, we are having something called use mount subscription, which helps you handling RxJS with so hooks, in my experience, are not a silver bullet, and yeah, they shouldn't. They were never thought they are. So what are the building blocks we can think of combining our app from them? What should they be? So Angular was having too many components, or not components in a way of React components, but building blocks, yeah. And React, contrary, has just a component which can be split into presentational and dump. It has also hooks, but hooks are a way of doing something with your component. And yeah, in general, it's hard to go with either Angular or React approach. We should find some kind of middle ground. So we should think what is important from our perspective, agree within all the team members, and use all over the code base. And my recommendation here is also inspired by Style Guide from Angular, but it's also inspired by well-known moved away way of organizing JavaScript front-end code, which is MVC, Model View Controller. What is tricky about MVC is when you type it in the Google Images, you will see plenty of diagrams, but each diagram is different. Each arrow is different on the diagrams. So there is no general MVC approach, I would say. But for React app, I would create something like model is just data from API and functions for getting this data for processing it. View should be JSX, and there we can think of presentational and container components. And controller is something like logic for the view. And here, coming back to particular example, particular files in this example, you can easily reason that project and project list is probably view, project service is the controller from MVC, and API TS contains all the data and functions for processing that data. So here is M, here is V, and there is C. And dividing in that way has many advantages. For instance, reusability of your code. You can easily switch from React, from JSX to, for instance, Vue with more like template approach, JSX behind the scenes, or Angular with pure template approach, and it would be really helpful. What I'm also finding handy is creating that index files. There are different opinions on that, but I like them as I treat this index each time as a contract for my whole folder. So let's imagine that I'm having project logic extracted to project service, right? So it's obvious that project service exports something and project TSX is importing it. And what the user, the other parts of my app, like app TSX, should import is not anything from this service, but just this project TSX. So I'm listing all the things I want to be want to be treated as a public API of my projects, I'm listing all the things under index.ts. And that's a way of thinking, of organizing code which is maintainable, in my opinion. And here is the code example. This is the example of this project TS. So as you can see, I'm importing from the project API, I'm importing model. I'm also importing a logic. Logic is pretty simple. There is just a handler, listener for a click event implemented there. There is also something from this common, as you can expect. That means that kind of syntax means that common has its own index under the hood, but yeah, it can be skipped. And I'm importing useMount subscription from there, and this is how component can then look like. So this is a clear view from MVC. Component is responsible mainly for the way of presenting. Yeah, there is also state management, but all the logic is delegated to external services, to, for instance, API service and to business logic service. Let's call it that way. So I have a super easy way of replacing React with some other solution. I want to, for instance, Angular, and I can use this Click project. I can, instead of useMount subscription, I can use get projects in some Angular lifecycle method, and so on and so forth. So this is nice, and it helps you organize your code. And to sum it up, it also helps you write super nice tests. It's not a summary, it's maybe like other benefits. Tests you should write just for the Click project function now with that approach. It's nice to use some kind of React testing library or something, but I've seen many problems with having more and more complicated components like context, history, routing, and so on. These things are always React-specific way of handling, of doing something, and the logic which should be tested is a totally separate way. So context history would be changed to something else with changes to a framework, with replacing React with something else, but Click project would stay unchanged. So this Click project would stay unchanged and well tested as it was. Then, yeah, as I said, it's easier to switch, and React is then responsible just for the view part of MVC as it should be, because as you can see in the official React docs is mainly a view library for seeing the things. Yeah, and you can get a shock, but seeing that approach at first glance, not everything in a single component, but after using it for a while, you are loving it and trying to do every single project that way. Coming one more level above, this is just the end of the presentation, coming to more like DevOps here, that structure is especially for projects which are using external design systems like Material UI, but when we are having our own design system or our own common libraries? Well, I would say for design system, the separate folder called layout and subfolders there, like button, like wizard, whatever pop-up, whatever component we can have, would be useful. Also, style book would be useful there. But this is the bare minimum. As soon as we are feeling that there are going to be more projects using the same design system, I would go to monorepo for the first project using it, and for the future, extracting a separate repository from this design system and maintain it separately. For big companies, I worked at Allegro for 2 years. We have a more concrete approach. We had a dedicated package with like CSS, then you can introduce another layers around this CSS. So you can, for instance, introduce web components package, then React around this web components. So you are creating multiple adapters, let's say this way, and then your final application is using just this React and doesn't care of other, just this React and doesn't care of other things. But you can find your own way of doing this. I at Allegro we have some kind of this approach, but a little different. I can think of others as well. So this is like how to organize your code with multiple repositories, with also with solutions like you have authentication library you want to use everywhere, so you should also think about adapters approach for that, and so on and so forth. So that was an introduction to clean architecture, let's say that way. I think it can help you improve your code base, and we should end up with some kind of quotation. So here it is. It wasn't Paulo Coelho who said that, but yeah, some random internet dude. But I can agree with that opinion. I think it's simple to write everything in one file at the beginning, but it's not a simple code. It's just simple for writing, not for reading. If you like my style, I recommend you to joining my newsletter, mat3.github.io/trends. For Polish version, it's trendy. Można też wejść na trendy, tak? Each month I'm sending like a summary of all the videos, articles, IT-related articles and videos I was able to read or see. I'm sharing it once a month, and here is the link to this presentation, and that's all I prepared for you today. Thank you for your attention.
So when you go now to remote, to your table, you could answer more of these questions, but I will read one question, which is, I think, really great. The Jewel of the Nile asked us, don't you think that a lot of presented problems are automatically solved when using Angular instead of React/Vue? If yes, why Angular loses the battle with React/Vue?
Yeah, so as I said, Angular is very good solution. It automatically introduces you some framework related way of thinking. It organizes your code. It enforces you to use to follow patterns. You cannot do different, but the setup is problematic. Also, it was the biggest fall of Angular was in the transition period between AngularJS and Angular. Then it was there were a lot of rumors. I remember that because I was observing that live. Let's say I was at the beginning of my career, I was really into AngularJS, but then it was like Google is moving out from Angular to totally new framework or something else. And another rumor was that Google is going with its own programming language called AtScript. Then it was a lot of rumors back then, and also React came out there back then, and it was something fresh. At the beginning, the performance was much better than AngularJS, and Angular wasn't there yet. And it was also a very important milestone for React to have React Native, and people started loving it, and it became a standard, and Angular lost the battle because of their bad decisions, right? This is my understanding of it. Also, it was harder at the beginning to start with Angular, especially with this command line interface and so on. So that was also problematic for people not knowing TypeScript to start immediately writing with it, and so on and so forth. So it was heavier. The way of introducing Angular was wrong, and React found a good time then.
Thanks a lot again for this presentation, and hopefully you will join us also on next Warsaw JS events, because that was excellent. Thank you very much, Mateusz.